2014 Cram, Critical Analysis and Reasoning Skills, Flashcard Set 8.6, Film Adaptation of Chinese Literature. As you view the reading of this passage, you'll notice a few highlighted selections of text. What I want you to do is garner meaning from these snippets in order to correctly select the answer choice from the Foundations of Comprehension question that follows the passage. This question will basically require you to recognize the central theme being discussed. Okay? So good luck and happy reading. Paragraph 1. The studies of adaptation tend to privilege literature over film, but not the other way around, and assume that a film adaptation has certain responsibility to remain faithful to the spirit of the text upon which it is based. The main purpose of Hsu Huang Detman's book, adapted for the screen, The Cultural Politics of Modern Chinese Fiction and Film, I would argue, is to provide some alternative thoughts besides. This assumption of how film and fiction should be viewed in adaptation studies. Detman is interested in how filmmakers have gone about the business and art of transposition from one medium to another. This transposition and the processes involved in it, in turn, enrich our understanding of the interconnectedness of the cultural context of texts and artists in Chinese films and fictions. In other words, Detman does not simply deal with the issue of what can be transferred in moving from fiction to film, namely narrative, and what cannot be. More importantly, she investigates the distinct ideological goals of writer and filmmaker that contribute to the differences between text and films. Paragraph 2. Detman looks at the connections between film and fiction in the context of various Chinese communities on the one hand and contemplates their differences on the other hand. For example, one case study that Detman uses to illustrate gender politics is the adaptation of Su Tong's novel Wives and Concubines into Zhang Yimou's film Raise the Red Lantern. Detman argues that Zhang draws from the strengths of Su's plots and reconfigures the story's narrative codes, notably transforming a key symbolic site in the novel. A defunct meaning no longer functioning, definitions are not a part of the original text. Well in a back garden, into a rooftop death chamber. As a result, Zhang's new metaphor illustrates the important directional option of changing the staging of the story to maximize the cinematic effect. The well in the novella, a novella is a short novel or a long story, and the compound roof in the film not only map out key theoretical differences between the two texts, but the distinct approaches to the exploitation of women also reflect profoundly different conceptions of the relationship between art and society. These two metaphorical spaces, Detman suggests, not only juxtapose meaning place or deal close together for contrasting effect, the fluidity of feminine ambivalence, ambivalence meaning the state of having mixed feelings or contradictory ideas about something or someone, with the solidity of the patriarch's iron rule, but also open up very distinct imaginary space for the reader and the viewer. Paragraph 3. Many scholars argue that the one thing that literature and film have in common is narrative. By narrative, I mean a series of events, sequentially connected by virtue of their involving a continuing set of characters. Detman questions this assumption in her book. One example is the adaptation of Liu Yichang's novel Intersection into Wong Kar-wai's film In the Mood for Love. In Detman's analysis, Wong appears to radically distill Liu's novel into something other than three frames containing three separate quotations: the opening shot, an intertitle, and a concluding still. Instead of reconstructing the literary narrative, Wong creates a new storyline, thereby challenging the assumption shared by many adaptation scholars that narrative is the property that makes two media commensurable. Commensurable meaning measurable by the same standard. Liberating filmic adaptation from almost every question of fidelity. Wong's style pushes us to recognize that Detman calls what Detman calls abstract adaptation, a style that creates a new theoretical dialogue about how film and literature can intersect to reproduce aesthetic resonances. Resonances here meaning a quality that makes something personally meaningful or important to someone. Detman refuses to privilege one reading or form over another and remains focused on the distinct ways in which they have been received. All right. Which of the following conclusions is most strongly implied by the passage? Is it A, Detman believes narrative is the only property that makes film and written novel commensurable? Is it B, Detman would recognize more work as adaptations than other scholars? Is it C, Detman believes that a film adaptation should be guided by the original work? Or is it D, Detman would require that a film adaptation of a book should be based in the same context? All right, so I'll press pause if you need to and open up a second window to view the reading of the passage and find the textual support to select the correct answer choice. All right, I'll give you a moment to think. All right. Okay, so the formatting of this question is definitely foundations of comprehension, and you basically have to understand the central theme of the passage. The first option, answer choice A, is denied in paragraph 3 when the passage gives an example of a filmmaker who creates a new storyline, quote, thereby challenging the assumption shared by many adaptation scholars that narrative is the property that makes the two media commensurable. Okay, and let's analyze answer choice C. Okay, so in paragraph 1, the passage states that most adaptation scholars believe there is a, quote, certain responsibility to remain faithful to the spirit of the text upon which it's based, okay? But Detman questions this assumption, so answer choice C is out. And as for answer choice D, Detman also provides examples of one adaptation that involves a change in context from a well to a rooftop, and a second that provides no context, suggesting that contextual consistency is not necessarily required. Answer choice D is out by default. As you already know, answer choice B is the correct answer choice, because although Detman does not seem to define the outer parameters of what it means to adapt a book into film, by relaxing expectations that an adaptation has the responsibility to provide a faithful transposition of a text, Detman can be said to consider a wider range of works, okay, as adaptation. So that's what you had to come up with in your mind in order to select answer choice B. Detman would recognize more works as adaptations than other scholars. All right? Okay.